What's going on, y'all? I finished the infamous Mid Waker not too long ago, and I wanted to give my final thoughts on the game. I've been going through all the Zelda games and giving my final thoughts as I've been on a Zelda binge from May up until now, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts as well. I do want to start off by saying I like the art style of the game. I feel like maybe that's the main gatekeeper for a lot of people, and that's why they called it Mid, because it does come off kind of like a kiddish game, especially if Majora's Mask was the last one you played. For me, Majora's was the last game I played. And Majora is very dark in terms of what happens and the way it looks, and the art style goes in a way different direction. So like for him to swing it back the other way into like a really positive, colorful environment, and he's like the youngest looking Link, right? Toon Link. So it's like I get why that could keep people away from the game. But ultimately I liked it, and I feel like this is the first game in the Zelda series where the facial expressions really popped. You know, I mean, he's running around, he's happy, he's sad, he picks up something, you know, he's like, oh, he's like ecstatic. You know, there's a lot of emotion, and I feel like they made some big breakthroughs there, and I think that was one of the main appeals I liked about the game, was every cutscene I was looking at faces for expressions, and it really pulled me in every time there was like some kind of dialogue happening. Alright, so next on the list, Sailing on the Sea. I feel like the adventuring aspect of this game was way different than Ocarina or Majora. Ocarina and in Majora, you're kind of running around through grass fields, and it's kind of lackluster, whereas this time you're on the open sea, you know? You're living that like fantasy of being a sailor, or maybe a pirate, I guess, if you want to stretch it that far. You know, you're out in the water, you're on your ship, you got the sail going, you know, the breeze and all that. Like, it's a really cool experience, but I feel like the novelty wears off mega fast, because it's like you're getting attacked a lot on the ocean, and fighting is not necessarily a bad thing because I welcome combat, but your options to fight at sea are kind of rough. Like, you're stuck to the boat, right? You can't get in the water, and then you have like a cannon. The cannon feels clunky, and it feels like the things attack you very quickly, and it doesn't feel like you can deal with those things when it comes to the cannon unless you're fighting other ships, and even then it still doesn't feel great. So even though the ocean part looks great, you know, sailing the seas and the seagulls flying overhead and, you know, exploring islands, like that sounds cool, but like you're on the ocean a lot of the game, and it's frustrating being attacked non-stop, and it doesn't feel good being able to defend yourself. Alright, so another thing that I didn't like about the sailing aspect was like having to change the direction of the wind. I tried to get cheeky maybe like halfway through the game about like turning it diagonal to see if I didn't have to change it as much. It helped a little bit, but I mean, if you missed something and you had to like double back, you had to change the wind every single time. And it was just like, I like the idea of the wind because it's like a sense of realism, but from a gaming perspective, having to change the wind every time you want to, like, you know, go in a different direction was kind of annoying. I mean, I get it, that's how it works, but I don't know. I'm not a game developer, but I just know that having to change the wind direction every time you want to go somewhere else and have to play the song with the Wind Waker, that was, you know, I felt like that was kind of an L. And speaking of the Wind Waker, I thought it was kind of odd that they went from the ocarina to the pipes and the drums and the guitar and all that stuff to the Wind Waker instrument, because like I get that he's like a conductor and he's conducting people, but it just seems weird for him to be, you know, doing that conducting and there's like nobody there. I get he's conducting the wind, but like it's just every time you see a conductor, they're before a big group of people. So when he's by himself, it just seems so out of place. Even if there's like one or two people, it just seems so unnecessary, or it didn't fit the way they wanted it to. I get the idea behind conducting, you know, the elements and stuff like that and the wind. That's cool in theory, but you know, when it comes time to execute it, you know, it sounds a lot better in your head. And I would have preferred an ocarina, or if there is going to be music, but you know, it is what it is. It's an instrument that got me through the game, but I did not love it. Alright, so let's talk combat, right? So combat is a big part of any game, and coming from Majora where combat kind of improved, you know, fighting with the mask and stuff, I was looking forward to seeing what was in this game. So they gave us a new spin attack, which you have to go through a small side quest to unlock, which I mean, I guess that's okay. And the spin attack is cool. You know, he does like a little cyclone. He spins, he gets dizzy. I don't know how I feel about the dizzy part, but I mean, it's a new move. And then they kind of add this thing where it's like when enemies go to attack, you can react, hit the attack button, you do like a parry or some kind of animation to like counter. But the flip side of that for those two enemies, like the caterpillar enemies and then like the dart nuts, which are dudes in armor, is that you can only hurt them when you do the reaction attack or whatever. So it's like it's not like a move that I can pull out and use whenever I want to. It's like specific to this enemy, and it's like I don't feel like that really moves combat forward. Like if anything, I guess maybe it moves it backwards. If you can't use your regular attacks, you have to sit there and wait for them to make a move before you can go. Overall, I think that was really the only change, is that they made it, you had to fight enemies a specific way. But I mean, it was you didn't have to think at all when it came to do it. You just had to wait and just push the button. So it was like, I feel like combat overall was disappointing. Let's dive into temples. I felt like they were pretty in line with the series, usually taking anywhere from an hour and a half to like 2+ hours. Pretty standard for the series. You go through the temple or dungeon, whatever you want to call it. You do puzzles. You get the new item from the dungeon. You do puzzles with that item. You fight a boss. I thought the boss designs were pretty cool in this one. They were definitely more mechanically demanding than previous ones, but it wasn't even that much more, but it was noticeable. So it wasn't hard. It was just, there was like a couple steps involved in the process. And I did like the way the bosses looked. Some of them were a little lackluster, but I'll do a video on all the bosses and stuff like that later. Overall, I thought the temples were kind of, they didn't make any groundbreaking adjustments, but they didn't go backwards either. Same thing with the bosses. In terms of equipment, I felt like this was pretty copy-paste. I think all the tools that you had in this game literally came from Ocarina or Majora. I don't remember there being anything new except for the lettuce, the little parachute thing you put over your head, which, hey, I'm glad they made it to Tears and Breath because it is very handy. But that was like the only new item, so it felt like a big copy-paste there. I was kind of disappointed it was the same old equipment. I mean, you had the grappling hook, which you could pull stuff off of people, off of enemies, which was cool. But it's a very novelty thing. It wasn't groundbreaking. Overall, I was disappointed with the lack of new equipment and the reuse of old equipment. To wrap things up, I think the game was really centered around the whole sailing aspect, this whole life on the ocean. But because, the constant harassment from enemies, the islands not really having a lot of stuff, looking for treasure in the ocean, like all of it's like rupees almost every time. It's rupees. All the items you get from sailing and exploring or items you get from other games, like it's a lot of rehash. It's a lot of recycled content, and the thing that they're trying to deliver with this life on the sea experience just kind of fell flat, and it just didn't work out. So if you take away the big, and I'm not speaking on their behalf, I'm just assuming that the sailing aspect was a big part of the game. If you scratch that part out, then you're left with your standard Zelda experience with no new additions to the game. It's exactly what you're used to from Ocarina of Majora. It is kind of disappointing. It looks great on the surface. The ideas there, the facial expressions and all that is very cool. The game definitely felt emotional. I will say the very final fight was awesome. It was definitely better than the last two final fights. But like other than that, this game really is kind of a few steps back, or it's really stagnant. It's like going from Modern Warfare 2 to Modern Warfare 3, back in the early 2000s or whatever. It copy pasted the previous game. It looks different, but it wasn't great. If you made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the game. If you loved it, if you hated it, drop a follow. If you made it this far and you like the content, you want to see more, maybe hit that like button for your boy. It all goes a long way. I greatly appreciate it. Y'all stay safe out there and have fun. Peace.